A single mother hid a bleeding stranger under her son's bed during a police raid, not knowing the man she saved was the most wanted mafia boss in the city. The sirens screamed through the thin walls of the riverside towers like mechanical wolves hunting prey. Lita Martin stood frozen in her cramped apartment hallway, her 6-year-old son pressed against her hip, his small fists clutching the worn fabric of her waitress uniform. The double shift at Marco's diner had left her bones aching, and her tips barely enough to cover next week's groceries, but none of that mattered now. Through the peephole, she watched officers flood the building, their boots thundering up the stairwell, their voices sharp with urgency. Someone was running, someone dangerous. Then she saw him, collapsed against her doorframe like a discarded suit, blood soaked through expensive black fabric. Neck tattoos snaked up from his collar. His breathing was shallow, labored. He looked like a victim of the streets, maybe a drunk who'd stumbled into the wrong fight. Her hand moved unconsciously to the door chain, a familiar gesture she'd learned from years of keeping trouble on the other side of cheap locks. But tonight, she would let the monster in. Before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm responding to everyone. Click subscribe, like this video. Your support helps us bring more thrilling stories, and trust me, you won't want me to miss them. Let's begin. The decision happened in the space between heartbeats, pure instinct overriding every survival lesson the streets had taught her. Lita grabbed the stranger's arm, feeling expensive fabric slick with blood, and dragged him across her threshold. He was heavier than he looked, dead weight that nearly pulled her down, but adrenaline made her strong. Her son's eyes went wide with terror. "Mommy! Bedroom! Now! Under your bed! Move!" She didn't recognize her own voice. It came out cold, authoritative, nothing like the woman who apologized to her landlord for existing. The boy obeyed instantly, scattering across the small living room, while Lita hauled the stranger through the narrow space between her thrift store couch and the coffee table she'd found on the curb last spring. The sirens were getting closer. Second floor, maybe third. The man's head lolled against her shoulder, his breath hot and irregular against her neck. Up close, she could see the details her fear had missed, the geometric precision of his tattoos, the quality of his shoes, the silver watch on his wrist that probably cost more than 6 months of her rent. This wasn't some street victim. This was someone important, someone dangerous. She should have left him in the hallway. But her hands kept moving, dragging him into her son's tiny bedroom, pushing aside Thomas the Tank Engine sheets and a scattered collection of Hot Wheels cars. The space under the bed was barely big enough, a hiding spot her boy used when the neighbors' fights got too loud, when the world outside their door became something children shouldn't see. Now she was stuffing a grown man into that sacred space. "Stay quiet," she hissed at the stranger, though his eyes remained closed, his consciousness somewhere far away. "Don't move, don't breathe loud." She threw a blanket over the bed frame's edge, concealing the gap, then grabbed her son from where he stood trembling near his toy box. The knock came exactly as she stepped back into the living room, 3 heavy strikes that made the cheap wood rattle in its frame. "LAPD. Open up." Lita's heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought it might break through. She pressed her palm against her chest, took one breath, then opened the door just wide enough to show her face. 2 officers stood in the hallway, their radios crackling with cross-chatter and codes she didn't understand. The one in front was older, white, with gray stubble and eyes that had seen too much of this building already. His partner, younger and black, kept his hand near his belt, scanning the visible corners of her apartment with practiced suspicion. "Ma'am, we're looking for a suspect who entered this building approximately 5 minutes ago. Asian male, late 30s, dark suit. Have you seen anyone matching that description?" The lie formed itself. No thought, no hesitation. "No, officer. I just got home from work. Been in here with my son." She adjusted her body language, making herself smaller, more forgettable. The waitress who never caused problems. The single mother who just wanted to be invisible. The older cop's eyes narrowed. "You work nights?" "Double shift, Marco's Diner, on 5th. He nodded slowly, like he was filing that information away for later. "Mind if we take a quick look around?" Her blood turned to ice. Behind her, in the bedroom, a man who could be bleeding to death was hidden under her 6-year-old's bed. If they found him, she'd lose everything. Her son would go to her sister in Phoenix, and she'd go to county jail for obstruction, maybe worse, depending on what this stranger had done. Her voice cracked. She let the fear show, because it was real, and officers could smell fake compliance from a mile away. "My son's already scared from all the sirens. He's got school tomorrow. Can you maybe just—" The younger officer glanced at his partner, then at her. Something shifted in his expression. Recognition, maybe. Or pity. He'd probably seen 100 women like her in buildings just like this one. "We're clearing the building floor by floor," the older cop said. "Lock your door. Don't open it for anyone until we give the all clear." They moved on, boots heavy on the stained carpet, radios squawking as they pounded on the next door down. Leda closed her door so slowly the hinges didn't make a sound. She turned the deadbolt, slid the chain, put her back against the wood, and slid down to the floor, her legs finally giving out. In the bedroom she could hear her son crying softly. Under his bed, a stranger's breathing rattled like broken glass. The stranger didn't wake up so much as reassemble himself from unconsciousness, piece by dangerous piece. Leda saw it happen from the doorway of her son's bedroom at 4:17 in the morning, a mug of coffee going cold in her shaking hands. She'd been watching him for hours, waiting for his chest to stop rising, waiting for the moment she'd have to figure out how to dispose of a body in a 6th-floor apartment. His eyes opened. Not the confused flutter of someone coming out of sleep, but the instant, predatory awareness of an animal that had never stopped hunting, even while it rested. They were dark, almost black in the pre-dawn shadows, and they fixed on her with an intensity that made her stomach drop. "Where am I?" Not a question, a demand. "My apartment." Her voice came out smaller than she wanted. "You were bleeding." The police were... He was already moving, rolling out from under the bed frame with a fluidity that shouldn't have been possible for someone who'd lost that much blood. He stood in one smooth motion, and Leda stumbled backward, her shoulder hitting the doorframe. The coffee mug slipped from her fingers, shattering on the floor between them. Neither of them looked down at it. He was taller than she'd realized, lean and compact in a way that suggested violence held in careful check. His suit was ruined, dark patches of dried blood across the white shirt, but even destroyed it probably cost more than everything in her apartment combined. The tattoos she'd glimpsed before were fully visible now, intricate patterns that crawled up his neck and disappeared beneath his collar, the kind of ink that told stories in a language she didn't speak. How long? Again, not a question. 6 hours, maybe 7. Leda kept her spine pressed against the doorframe, her mind racing through exit strategies that didn't exist. Her son was asleep on the couch in the living room. The front door was 15 feet away. This man stood between her and every possible escape route. He touched his side where the blood had come from, his fingers probing the wound with clinical detachment. His face showed nothing, no pain, no relief, nothing human at all. When he looked up at her again, something had shifted in his expression, a calculation being made. "You hid me from the police." "I thought you were," she stopped, unsure how to finish that sentence without sounding like an idiot. What had she thought? That he was harmless? That saving him would be some small act of kindness that wouldn't cost her everything? "You thought I was what?" His accent was barely there, just the ghost of Korean inflections beneath perfect English. A drunk? A victim? The way he said victim made it sound like the most contemptible thing a person could be. He moved past her into the living room, his gait slightly uneven but controlled. He took in the space with the same systematic attention he'd given his wound, the peeling paint, the second-hand furniture, the stack of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter she hadn't had time to hide. His eyes lingered on her son asleep on the couch, small body curled under a thin blanket, and something dangerous flickered across his face. "You have a child." It wasn't a question, but Leda answered anyway, her voice hardening with the only authority she had left. "He doesn't know anything. He didn't see your face clearly. He won't remember." The stranger turned to look at her, and for the first time, something like amusement touched the corners of his mouth. It made him look worse, not better. More dangerous. "You think I'm worried about a 6-year-old identifying me? I don't know what you're worried about. I don't know who you are, or what you did, or why the police want you. The exhaustion hit her all at once. 20 hours of fear and adrenaline crashing into the reality of what she'd done. "I just need you to leave. Please." He studied her for a long moment, his head tilted slightly like she was a puzzle he was solving in real time. Then he moved to her kitchen sink, turned on the faucet, and began washing the blood from his hands, with the casual familiarity of someone who'd done it 1,000 times before. "I can't leave yet," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "They're still searching the building. They'll have units on the street until noon at least." He dried his hands on her dish towel, staining the cheap fabric rust red. "I'll need to stay here until dark." "No." The word came out strangled. "No, you can't." "I can." He turned to face her fully, and the coldness in his eyes made her breath catch. "And you'll let me?" "Because you're already an accomplice, Miss Martin. The moment you opened that door, you chose a side." She hadn't told him her name. She hadn't told him anything. He smiled then, sharp and humorless. "Don't look so surprised. Your mail is on the counter." They came at sunset, 3 men in black cars that didn't belong in a neighborhood where most residents took the bus. Leda saw them from her living room window, her stomach nodding as they stepped onto the sidewalk with the kind of synchronized precision that spoke of military training or something worse. The stranger, She still didn't know his name, and he hadn't offered it. Moved to the window with that same unnatural fluidity, barely glancing down before pulling back. They found me. No emotion in his voice. Just fact. Who? Leta's son was still at the neighbor's apartment, thank God. Dropped off 3 hours ago, with a mumbled excuse about needing to clean. She'd been buying time, hoping the stranger would leave before dark like he'd promised, but he'd spent the day on her couch making phone calls in rapid Korean, his voice low and controlled, even when the conversations clearly weren't going well. He didn't answer her question. Instead, he moved to her door and opened it before she could stop him, standing in the threshold like he owned the building, like he owned the entire city. His posture had changed, shoulders back, chin up, that cold authority she'd glimpsed earlier, now burning at full intensity. The 3 men came up the stairs without bothering to hide their weapons. She could see the bulges under their jackets, the way their eyes swept the hallway with professional paranoia. The one in front was older, maybe 50, with silver streaking through his hair and a scar that ran from his ear to his jaw. When he saw the stranger, he stopped so abruptly the 2 behind him nearly collided into his back. Then he dropped to one knee. The other 2 followed instantly, their heads bowed, fists pressed against their hearts in some gesture Leta didn't recognize but understood completely. This was submission. This was reverence. The stranger said something in Korean, his voice sharp with command, and the 3 men rose as one. The older one responded, his tone apologetic, almost pleading. An argument began, quick and terse, words flying back and forth too fast for Leta to catch anything but the tension crackling between them. She stood frozen in her own living room, watching her small world crack open to reveal something vast and terrible underneath. This wasn't some low-level criminal she'd hidden. This wasn't even a captain or a lieutenant. The older man glanced at her, just once, and the look in his eyes told her everything she needed to know. He was calculating her value, deciding if she was a loose end that needed cutting. The stranger, no, the boss, because that's clearly what he was, snapped something harsh, and the older man's attention jerked back immediately. He bowed again, deeper this time, then gestured to the other 2. They moved into her apartment, like they owned it, checking her windows, her bathroom, her son's bedroom. One of them pulled back the curtain and examined the fire escape, while the other spoke into a phone in rapid Korean. What's happening? Leta's voice came out barely above a whisper. What are they doing? The boss finally looked at her, and something in his expression had shifted. Not softer, exactly, but more present, like he was actually seeing her for the first time since he'd woken up, securing the perimeter. You're compromised now. Compromised? The word felt foreign in her mouth. I didn't ask for any of this. You need to leave. All of you need to leave right now. The older man said something that sounded like a warning, but the boss cut him off with a single word. Then he crossed the distance between them, moving into her space with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. My name is Shen Chu, he said quietly, and the way he said it made it sound like a confession. And leaving now would get you killed. I don't understand. The people who poisoned me know I came to this building. They have informants in the police department. By now, they've reviewed every officer's body camera footage from last night. His eyes held hers, dark and unrelenting. They saw you. They saw you lie to protect me. Which means you're not neutral anymore, Miss Martin. You're mine. The word hung in the air between them like a noose. One of the men called out something from the bedroom, and Shen turned away from her, issuing orders in Korean that sent both younger men moving toward the door. The older one remained, taking up position near the window with the casual stance of someone prepared to stand there for hours. This is insane. Leta's hands were shaking. I have a son. I have a job. I can't just... You called in sick this morning, Shen said, and her blood went cold. I heard you on the phone with your manager. You told him you had the flu. You had no right. I had every right. You saved my life. He moved back to the couch, lowering himself carefully, and for the first time she saw pain flicker across his face. The wound in his side was still healing. He was still vulnerable, even surrounded by his men. That creates certain obligations. On both sides. I don't want obligations. I want you gone. What you want stopped mattering the moment you opened your door. His voice wasn't cruel, just absolute. Now we deal with what is. The eviction notice appeared on her door 3 days after Shin Chu turned her apartment into a fortified position. Leta found it Tuesday morning, the bright orange paper a slash of violence against her faded paint. 30 days to vacate. 3 months back rent she didn't have, and couldn't explain why she suddenly owed when she'd been paying, barely but consistently, every month for 2 years. She stood in the hallway staring at it, the paper trembling in her hands, while behind her the apartment hummed with the quiet presence of dangerous men. Shin had moved 2 guards into rotation, one always positioned by her window, another near the door. They changed shifts with military precision, arriving and leaving through the service entrance like ghosts. Her neighbors hadn't noticed yet, or maybe they had and were too smart to ask questions. Problem? Shin's voice came from directly behind her, close enough that she jumped. She'd been avoiding him for 3 days, retreating to her bedroom whenever he was in the living room, timing her movements around his routines. He was still recovering, still spending most of his time on her couch, making calls and receiving visits from men who looked at him like he was a prophet. But his presence filled the apartment like smoke, inescapable and suffocating. "My landlord," she said flatly. "He's evicting me." Shin plucked the notice from her hands, his eyes scanning it with the same clinical attention he gave everything. "Ramirez Property Management, Unit 6F. He looked up at her. "You're current on rent." "I was. Until this." Someone paid him, not a question. Shin handed the notice back to her, already pulling out his phone. He spoke in Korean, brief and commanding, then ended the call. "What's your landlord's name?" "It doesn't matter." "His name, Miss Martin." The authority in his voice made her answer before she could think better of it. "Frank Ramirez." "But you can't just—" "I can." He was already moving toward the door, gesturing for the guard stationed there to follow. "And I will." She should have stopped him, should have insisted this was her problem, her life, her consequences to handle. But exhaustion had worn her down to nothing, and some small, shameful part of her wanted to see what would happen when someone finally stood up to Frank Ramirez, who'd been bleeding this building dry for a decade. They returned 2 hours later. Shin's knuckles were clean, no blood, but the guard behind him had a split lip, and the kind of satisfied expression that suggested violence had been enthusiastically dispensed. Shin dropped a torn piece of paper on her kitchen counter, the eviction notice, now with void written across it in shaking handwriting. "You're current on rent," Shin said. "For the next 6 months, paid in full." Leda stared at the paper, then at him. "What did you do?" "I had a conversation with Mr. Ramirez about appropriate business practices." He moved to the sink, washing his hands even though they were already clean. A ritual, she realized. Something he did after conducting business. He was very understanding once we established certain facts. "What facts?" "That this building is under my protection now. That any attempts to displace its tenants will be viewed as a personal insult. That personal insults have consequences." He dried his hands on the dish towel, the same one he'd stained with blood days ago. She still hadn't washed it. Couldn't bring herself to touch it. "He won't bother you again. I didn't ask you to do that. You saved my life when I was unconscious and bleeding on your doorstep. You lied to the police. You risked your freedom and your son's safety for a stranger." He turned to face her fully, and something burned in his eyes that might have been respect, or might have been something more dangerous. "That creates a debt, Miss Martin. One I intend to repay." The next morning her car started. The ancient Honda she'd been nursing through its death throes for 8 months suddenly purred like it was new, and when she popped the hood she found parts that definitely hadn't been there yesterday. Professional work. Expensive work. Her phone bill disappeared. The disconnection notice she'd been dreading simply vanished from the utility company's system, replaced with a credit that showed 6 months paid in advance. When she called to verify, the representative stammered through an explanation about a clerical error, a settlement from a class action lawsuit she'd never heard of. The manager at Marco's diner, who'd been cutting her hours, who'd been making comments about her appearance and finding excuses to brush against her in the narrow kitchen, he stopped coming to work. Just disappeared. When she asked the other waitresses, they said he'd taken a sudden leave of absence. Medical emergency. Nobody seemed to know the details, but the new manager immediately restored her full schedule and gave her the prime Friday night shift. Shen never mentioned any of it, never asked for gratitude or acknowledgement. He just continued his recovery on her couch, making his calls, receiving his visitors, slowly rebuilding whatever empire had nearly collapsed when someone poisoned him. But she felt the changes like seismic shifts in her reality. The collection agency that had been harassing her for 2 years suddenly agreed to a settlement for 30 cents on the dollar. Her son's school, which had been threatening to drop him from the aftercare program for unpaid fees, sent a letter saying an anonymous donor had covered the entire year. Every problem that had been slowly crushing her, grinding her down into dust, simply evaporated. On Friday night, she came home from her shift to find Shen at her kitchen table, papers spread in front of him, his guard stationed at the window. He looked up when she entered, and she saw the exhaustion in his face, the weight of whatever war he was fighting from her living room. "Why are you doing this?" she asked. He didn't pretend not to understand. "Because you saw me at my weakest and chose mercy over self-preservation. Because in my world, that kind of loyalty is rarer than diamonds and more valuable than blood." He stood slowly, still favoring his injured side. "Because I'm a monster, Miss Martin. But even monsters understand debt." The intimacy came in fragments, small moments accumulated in the spaces between danger. Leda noticed it first on a Tuesday morning when she found Shen sitting on the floor of her son's bedroom, a broken toy truck in his hands and a screwdriver from her junk drawer laid out beside him. He'd taken it apart with surgical precision, replacing a stripped gear with something he'd fashioned from a pen spring. "You didn't have to do that," she said from the doorway. "He was crying about it last night." Shen didn't look up, his fingers working with the same controlled efficiency he brought to everything. "I could hear him through the wall." Her son had been crying about a lot of things lately: the strange men in their apartment, the way his mother jumped at every sound, the fact that he couldn't have friends over anymore. But the truck had been the breaking point, the final small tragedy in a world that had become incomprehensible. "Thank you," she said quietly. He handed her the repaired toy without comment, but something passed between them in that exchange. A recognition that they were both trying to protect the same small person from the consequences of her single moment of mercy. The late nights were when the walls came down furthest. Shen didn't sleep much. She'd learned that from the light under the bathroom door at 3 a.m., the quiet sound of him moving through her apartment like a restless ghost. She'd started staying up too, unable to sleep while he prowled her living room, until finally she just began making 2 cups of tea instead of 1. He'd looked surprised the first time she'd handed him a mug without asking if he wanted it. Actually surprised, like the concept of someone anticipating his needs was foreign. "You take it plain," she'd said. "No sugar." "I noticed." "You notice everything." Not an accusation. An observation. Survival skill. You learn to read people when you're always one mistake away from eviction. She'd sat down on the opposite end of the couch, maintaining careful distance. You learn what people want before they have to tell you. Makes them less likely to hurt you. He'd studied her over the rim of his mug, and she'd seen something shift in his expression. Understanding, maybe. Or recognition. "My father used to say that survivors make the most dangerous enemies," he'd said finally. "Because they've already lost everything once. They know how to lose, which means they know how to risk everything. Is that what I am to you? Dangerous?" His smile had been sharp and genuine. Terrifying. She'd started learning Korean from listening to his phone calls. Not the language itself, but the rhythms of it. She could tell when he was giving orders versus receiving bad news, could hear the difference between strategy discussions and damage control. He noticed her noticing, caught her tracking a conversation one afternoon, and something like amusement flickered across his face. "You want to know what they're saying? I want to know if I should pack a bag and run." But there was no heat in it anymore. They both knew she wasn't leaving. "They're saying my second-in-command thinks you're a liability. That keeping you alive is sentimental and dangerous." He said it casually, like discussing the weather. "I told him if anything happens to you or your son, I'll feed him to the harbor piece by piece." She should have been horrified. Should have recoiled from the casual brutality of it. Instead, she felt something warm and terrible bloom in her chest. Safety. The most dangerous gift he could give her. He started cooking on Thursday nights, taking over her tiny kitchen with the confidence of someone who knew his way around a knife. Korean dishes she didn't have names for, rich and complex. Nothing like the ramen and frozen dinners that had sustained her for years. Her son watched from the table with wide eyes, and Shin explained each ingredient with the patience of someone teaching a craft. "You're good with him," Lita said, watching Shen show her son how to fold dumplings, his tattooed hands guiding small fingers with surprising gentleness. "I had a younger brother," past tense, the first personal detail he'd offered freely. "Long time ago." She didn't ask what happened. The weight in his voice told her everything she needed to know about loss. One night, after her son was asleep and the guard had changed shifts, she found Shen on her fire escape, smoking a cigarette despite the wound in his side that was still healing. She joined him without invitation, settling against the railing in the warm night air. "Tell me something true," she said. "Something that's not about debt or obligations or whatever empire you're building from my couch." He took a long drag, exhaling smoke into the darkness. "I'm tired," he said finally. "I've been at war for 15 years. And I'm so goddamn tired I can barely remember what peace feels like." He looked at her then, and she saw past the cold authority to something raw underneath. "Until I woke up in your apartment. And for about 30 seconds, before I remembered who I was, I felt safe." She reached out without thinking, her hand covering his on the railing. His fingers were cold despite the heat. "You are safe," she said. "Here. With us. For as long as you need to be." His hand turned under hers, their fingers interlacing, and neither of them pulled away. The detective came back on a Wednesday morning, alone this time, without the partner who'd shown mercy at her door 2 weeks ago. Leda saw him through the peephole, the same gray stubble, the same exhausted eyes, but something about his posture had changed. He looked purposeful, determined, like a man who'd finally found the missing piece of a puzzle that had been eating at him. She opened the door before he could knock, keeping the chain on. Behind her, the apartment was empty of guards for the first time in days. Shen had sent them away an hour ago, some strategic repositioning she didn't fully understand. He remained on her couch, a newspaper open in his lap, looking for all the world like a recovering friend staying with family. "Miss Martin." The detective's voice was carefully neutral. "Mind if I come in? Just a few follow-up questions." "I already told you everything I know." "I don't think you did." He pulled out his phone, swiping through something before holding it up to show her. A grainy still from body camera footage, her face in the doorway, eyes wide with fear, the lie forming on her lips. "This was taken at 11:43 p.m., the night we were searching for a suspect. You told me you'd just gotten home from work." Her mouth went dry. "I had. Marco's Diner closes at 11. It's a 6-minute walk from here. You weren't wearing a jacket in this footage, Miss Martin, but it was 42 degrees that night." He lowered the phone, his eyes never leaving hers. "So either you walked home in the cold without a coat, or you'd been home long enough to take it off. Which means you lied about just getting home." Behind her, she heard the subtle shift of Shen adjusting his position on the couch. Not moving toward them. Not yet. Just, ready. "I don't remember exactly when I got home. I was tired. There's a man in your apartment right now." The detective's voice dropped lower. "I can see his shadow from here. Big guy. Not your son. Want to tell me who's visiting at 9 in the morning on a Wednesday?" The noose was tightening. She could feel it around her throat. "My cousin. From out of town." "Your cousin?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Here's what I think happened, Miss Martin. I think you saw our suspect. I think maybe you even helped him. And I think right now, you're in over your head with people who are going to get you killed." He pulled out a business card, holding it in the narrow gap between door and frame. "There's a unit watching this building. Rival gang. Korean organized crime. They're waiting for someone. And my guess is they're waiting for the same man we were chasing that night." He pressed the card into her hand. "When they come, and they will come, you call me. Immediately. Otherwise you're going to end up as collateral damage in a war you don't understand." She took the card, because refusing it would have been more suspicious. "There's no one here but me, and my son, and my cousin. You're wasting your time." "I hope I am." He stepped back from the door, but his eyes lingered on her face. "For your sake I really hope I am." She closed the door and stood there, the card burning in her palm like evidence. When she finally turned around, Shen was standing, the newspaper forgotten, his expression carved from stone. "He knows," she whispered. "He suspects. There's a difference." But tension radiated from him like heat. "The rival unit, did he say where?" "Just watching the building." Shen moved to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to scan the street. His jaw tightened. Black sedan. 2 buildings down. Been there for 3 days. He let the curtain fall. "They're not just watching anymore. They're staging." "Staging for what?" He didn't answer directly. Instead, he pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking in rapid Korean. The conversation was brief, tense, and when he ended it, the look on his face made her stomach drop. "They found my safe house. Killed 2 of my men last night." He said it without emotion, but his hands were clenched at his sides. "They're eliminating my resources systematically. Which means they're planning a final move. Here. Not a question. Here." The apartment suddenly felt smaller, the walls pressing in. This place that had been her refuge, her small piece of safety in a hostile world, was about to become a battlefield. "My son is already at school. I had someone watching." Shen moved toward her, and for the first time since he'd woken up, she saw something close to fear in his eyes. "Lita, listen to me. What's coming isn't going to be quiet. It's going to be loud and fast, and the police will come. When that happens, you need to—" The window exploded inward in a shower of glass. The gunshot came half a second later, the sound catching up to the bullet that had already embedded itself in her kitchen wall. Shen moved on pure instinct, tackling her to the floor as 2 more shots punched through the broken window. Her ears were ringing, her hands were cut from the glass, and somewhere in the building her neighbors were screaming. "Stay down," Shen hissed in her ear. He had a gun now. She didn't know where it had come from, didn't remember seeing him armed, and his body was covering hers, protecting her with his own flesh. Another shot. Then another. Then the sound of squealing tires and shouts in Korean from the street below. The war had found them, and there was nowhere left to hide. The glass was still falling when Shen's phone rang. He answered it with one hand, the other keeping his gun trained on the shattered window, his body still shielding Lita's. The conversation lasted maybe 10 seconds, all in Korean, before he shoved the phone back in his pocket. "We have 4 minutes. Maybe 5. He pulled her to her feet, his grip iron on her arm. "There's a car coming. Underground garage. We move now. My son. Already handled. My men pulled him from school 20 minutes ago. He's safe." Shen was moving through her apartment with lethal efficiency, grabbing his jacket, checking the hallway through the peephole. But if we stay here, you won't be. Leda's mind couldn't catch up to her body. Her hands were bleeding from the glass, small cuts that stung and wept, but she barely felt them. The detective's card was still clutched in her left hand, the edges digging into her palm. She could call him. Right now. End this before it got worse. Shen saw her looking at it. You want to call the police, call them. But they won't get here before the next wave does, and when they find you, they'll find you dead. He wasn't being cruel. Just factual. Your choice, Leda. Always your choice. She dropped the card on the floor. Okay. Her voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. Okay. What do I do? Something flickered across his face. Approval, maybe, or respect. He crossed to her bedroom closet, pulling out the duffel bag she used for laundry, and started filling it with clothes. Her clothes. Efficient, quick, grabbing things she'd need for more than a day. When he turned back to her, he was holding something she'd never seen before. A small black handgun, compact and deadly. You know how to use this? No. You're about to learn. He showed her the basics in 30 seconds flat. Safety off, safety on, how to hold it, where to aim. Center mass. Always center mass. You don't fire unless I'm down, or someone's coming through a door I'm not watching. Understand? She took the gun. It was heavier than she expected, cold and foreign in her shaking hands. I can't. You can. You already did the hard part, when you lied to the police. He met her eyes, and she saw no judgment there, only certainty. This is just the next step. The sound of footsteps in the hallway made them both freeze. Heavy boots. Multiple sets. Not running, but moving with purpose. Shen put his finger to his lips, then gestured for her to follow him toward the kitchen. Away from the front door, toward the service entrance she'd never used, the one that led to the back stairs and the fire exit. They were halfway across the living room when her front door exploded inward. Not picked. Not knocked down. Blown open with something that made her ears ring, and her vision white out. Shen was already firing, 3 quick shots toward the doorway, and then his hand was on her back, shoving her toward the kitchen as men poured into her apartment. She didn't think. Just ran. The gun was in her hand, and her feet were moving, and behind her she could hear Shen's gun barking, methodical and controlled, and the wet sounds of bullets finding flesh. The service entrance was locked. She'd never unlocked it in 2 years, and her fingers fumbled with the deadbolt while the sounds of violence erupted behind her. The door came open just as someone grabbed her hair. She spun, the gun coming up on pure instinct, and fired. The recoil nearly broke her wrist. The sound was impossibly loud in the confined space. The man holding her hair stumbled backward, a red flower blooming on his shoulder, his face twisted in shock. He hadn't expected her to be armed, hadn't expected the victim to bite back. She fired again, center mass, just like Shen had told her. This time the man went down. Shen appeared beside her, his face spattered with blood that wasn't his, and grabbed her arm. Move, now. They ran. Down the service stairs, taking them 3 at a time, her lungs burning and her hands still shaking from the recoil. Behind them she could hear shouting, more gunfire, the building coming alive with violence. They hit the basement level, and Shen kicked open the door to the parking garage, just as a black SUV screeched to a stop in front of them. The door flew open. One of Shen's guards was driving, another in the passenger seat with an assault rifle across his lap. Shen shoved Leda into the back seat and threw himself in after her, and the SUV was moving before the door even closed. Stay down, Shen ordered, pushing her head below the window line as bullets sparked off the vehicle's armored plating. The SUV accelerated hard, tires screaming, and Leda felt the violent jerk as they crashed through the parking gate. She was still holding the gun. There was blood on her hands, hers or the man she'd shot, she couldn't tell. Her apartment was gone. Her life was gone. Everything she'd built, every careful step she'd taken to stay invisible and safe, had just burned to ashes. Shen pulled her against his chest, his hand cradling the back of her head, and she realized she was shaking. Not from fear, from something worse. She'd crossed a line, fired a weapon, shot a man. There was no going back from this. No pretending she was just a victim caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was a soldier in Shen Chu's war now, and some terrible part of her felt alive for the first time in years. The safe house was a warehouse in the industrial district, all concrete and corrugated metal, and the smell of rust. Shen's men had fortified it over the past 2 weeks. She could see the preparation in the reinforced doors, the security cameras, the weapons stacked in neat rows along the east wall. Her son was there, being watched by a woman with kind eyes and a gun on her hip, and Leda held him for 30 seconds before Shen pulled her away. We don't have time. He was right. The rival gang had followed them, or maybe they'd always known about this place. Either way, The first shots came 20 minutes after they arrived, punching through the metal walls with sharp, percussive cracks that made her ears ring. Shen moved his men into position with hand signals and clipped Korean commands. 6 men total, including him. Not enough. She could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way his jaw clenched as he checked his ammunition. They were outnumbered, and he knew it. "How many out there?" she asked. 15, maybe 20. He said it like a death sentence. The woman with her son, Min, she'd said her name was, had already moved them to the interior room, a windowless office with a steel door and enough supplies for a siege. But Lita couldn't stay there. Couldn't hide while Shen fought a war he might not survive. She found him at the north window, his rifle trained on the approach. "Tell me how to help." "You help by staying alive. Staying with your son. That's not good enough." She grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. "You said I was terrifying because I know how to risk everything. So let me risk it. Let me do something." He studied her face, and she saw the calculation behind his eyes, weighing her value, her capabilities. Finally, he gestured to one of his men, speaking in rapid Korean. The man disappeared and returned with a walkie-talkie and a set of building schematics. "The electrical panel is in the basement. If you can get to it and kill the lights, we'll have the advantage." Night vision. He tapped his rifle scope. "They won't." "Where's the basement access?" He showed her on the schematic. "A service corridor on the west side, away from the main assault. Dangerous, but possible. You'll have maybe 3 minutes before they realize what you're doing. After that, they'll send someone to stop you. Then I better be fast." His hand caught her chin, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. "If you die doing this, I will burn this entire city down. If I don't do this, we're all dead anyway." She took the walkie-talkie and the schematic and moved toward the west corridor before she could think better of it. One of Shen's guards, the young one with the split lip from the landlord incident, fell in behind her without being asked. Protection detail. Insurance. The corridor was dark and narrow, lit only by emergency strips that cast everything in sickly green. She could hear the gunfire intensifying behind them, the shouts in Korean, and the sharp crack of return fire. Shen's men were holding, but barely. The basement door was locked. Her guard kicked it open with one efficient strike, and they descended into darkness, thick enough to choke on. She used her phone flashlight to navigate, the schematic shaking in her hands as she searched for the electrical panel. She found it behind a stack of pallets, a gray metal box covered in warning labels. The main breaker was obvious, a large red handle that practically begged to be pulled. She reached for it just as footsteps echoed on the stairs behind them. Her guard moved to intercept, his gun coming up, but 3 men emerged from the darkness, and the first burst of gunfire cut him down before he could get a shot off. He went down hard, blood spreading across the concrete, and Lita was alone. The 3 men advanced, their weapons trained on her, shouting in Korean. She didn't understand the words, but she understood the intent. "Drop the gun. Step away from the panel. Surrender." Instead, she started talking. "You know who I am." Her voice came out steadier than she expected. "I'm the one who saved him. The woman who hid Shen Chu when he was bleeding out. The one he trusts." She moved sideways, away from the panel, drawing their attention. "Which means I know things. About his operations. His accounts. His people." One of them stepped closer, his gun barrel inches from her face. He said something sharp, dismissive. "Kill me, and that information dies with me." She kept moving, leading them away from the panel, toward the far wall where shadows pooled deepest. "But take me alive, deliver me to your boss, and maybe you get a promotion instead of a bullet for letting Shen Chu slip through your fingers again." They were conferring now, 2 of them arguing, while the third kept his weapon on her. The debate was giving her seconds, maybe a minute if she was lucky. She just needed one of them to get close enough. The nearest man made his decision, lowering his gun slightly as he moved to grab her arm. She let him get within reach, let him think she was compliant and defeated. Then she yanked the electrical panel open and slammed the main breaker down. The world went black. She dropped flat as gunfire erupted, muzzle flashes strobing the darkness like lightning. But the shots were wild, panicked, the shooters firing at where she'd been instead of where she was. She crawled on her belly toward where her guard had fallen, her hands searching for his weapon in the dark. Her fingers found metal. Then the gunfire upstairs changed, became methodical, controlled. The sound of Shen's men hunting in the dark with night vision, while their enemies fired blind. It took 4 minutes. 4 minutes of chaos and screaming, and the wet sounds of bullets finding targets. Then silence. Then Shen's voice on the walkie-talkie, rough and alive. "Lita, report." She pressed the button with shaking hands. "Basement. Lights are down. Her voice cracked. "I'm okay. Stay there. We're coming to you." When they found her, she was sitting against the wall next to her dead guard, his weapon across her lap. her hands covered in blood that mostly wasn't hers. Shen knelt beside her, his face illuminated by someone's flashlight, and for once his expression was completely unguarded. "You gave us the opening," he said quietly. "We took them all." Above them, the warehouse was silent, except for the sound of his men checking bodies and securing the perimeter. The siege was over. The war wasn't won, but this battle, this crucial, desperate battle, belonged to them. She'd helped him reclaim his power, and in doing so, she'd claimed some of her own. The penthouse overlooked the city like a kingdom waiting to be claimed. Floor-to-ceiling windows, marble floors, furniture that cost more than Leda had earned in her entire life. Shen's empire, rebuilt in the 3 weeks since the warehouse siege. His rivals were dead or scattered, his organization consolidated under his iron control, and the city's underworld had bent its knee to the man who'd survived poison, betrayal, and a coordinated assassination attempt. Leda stood at the window with a glass of wine she hadn't touched, watching the lights of Los Angeles spread out below like fallen stars. Behind her, in the guest room that was larger than her entire apartment had been, her son slept in a bed that probably cost more than her car. Safe. Fed. Protected by men who would die before they let harm come to him. "You've been quiet." Shen's voice came from the doorway, soft in the way he only allowed himself to be when they were alone. "I'm thinking." "About?" She turned to face him. He'd changed since the warehouse. Not physically, though the wound in his side had finally healed, but in the way he carried himself. The exhaustion was gone, replaced by the absolute certainty of a man who'd reclaimed his throne and knew exactly how much blood it had cost. "About what happens now," she said. He crossed to the bar, pouring himself whiskey with the casual grace of someone who owned everything in the room, including the air they breathed. "I've been thinking about that, too." He took a drink, his eyes never leaving hers. "I'm going to make you an offer. You can refuse it. No consequences, no debt, no obligations." "I don't believe that." His smile was sharp. "Smart woman, but it's true nonetheless." He set down his glass. "Your apartment is gone. Burned out by the police after the shooting. Your landlord filed an insurance claim and disappeared to Florida. Your job at Marco's closed down, health violations that mysteriously appeared after I made some calls. You destroyed my life. I destroyed a life that was killing you slowly." He moved closer, and she saw the intensity burning behind his calculated calm. Working doubles for tips that barely covered rent, dodging bill collectors, raising your son in a building where the heat didn't work, and the neighbors screamed through the walls. His voice dropped lower. "That wasn't a life, Leda. That was survival, and you deserved better." "So what? You're offering me this?" She gestured at the penthouse, at the opulence that felt like a cage made of gold. "To be what, exactly? Your mistress? Your kept woman? My partner?" The word hung in the air between them like a vow. "I need someone I can trust. Someone who isn't afraid to tell me when I'm wrong. Someone who understands that power without conscience is just tyranny." He took another step, close enough now that she could see the scars on his neck, the ones that disappeared beneath his collar. "You saved my life when you had every reason to let me die. You protected me when I was weak. You fought beside me when you could have run. That makes you more valuable than any soldier in my organization." "I shot a man." The words came out hollow. She'd been carrying that weight for 3 weeks, the memory of the gun bucking in her hands, the blood blooming on his shoulder. "I killed someone. You survived." His hand came up to cup her face, thumb brushing her cheekbone with unexpected gentleness. "You did what you had to do to protect yourself and your son. That's not murder, Leda. That's evolution." She should pull away, should recognize this for what it was, a monster offering her a crown made of bones and blood money. But when she looked at him, she didn't see the ruthless Mafia boss who'd ordered men tortured and killed. She saw the man who'd fixed her son's toy truck, who'd cooked dinner in her cramped kitchen, who'd held her on the fire escape and admitted he was tired of war. "What about my son?" she asked. "What kind of life is this for him? A safe one, a powerful one, the best schools, the best protection, a future where he never has to hide under a bed while police pound on the door." Shin's voice was absolute. "I can't give him a normal childhood. That ship sailed the night you opened your door. But I can give him something better, a life where he never has to be afraid. And what do I have to give in return?" "Everything." He said it without hesitation. "Your loyalty, your truth, your partnership in building something that's more than just violence and territory." His other hand came up, framing her face between his palms. "I'm not offering you a cage, Leda. I'm offering you a throne. The question is whether you're brave enough to sit on it." She thought about her apartment with its peeling paint and broken heating, the double shifts and the collection calls, and the constant grinding fear that one mistake would cost her everything. That life was already gone. burned away the moment she'd chosen mercy over self-preservation. She could go back, rebuild somewhere else, start over with a new name in a new city. Shin would let her. She believed that. He'd give her money and protection, and let her disappear into obscurity. Or she could step forward, into the darkness and the danger, and the terrible, seductive power of standing beside a man who'd leveled empires. Lita pulled his hands away from her face, but didn't let them go. Instead, she interlaced her fingers with his, feeling the calluses and scars, the evidence of a life lived in violence. "I have conditions," she said. His smile was genuine this time, reaching his eyes. "I expected nothing less. My son's education comes first. Always. No violence near him. Ever." Her grip tightened. "And I'm not just decoration. If I'm your partner, I make decisions. I have a voice. You don't get to shut me out when things get dangerous." "Agreed. And one more thing." She stepped closer, closing the distance between them until she could feel his breath on her lips. "You teach me everything. How your world works. How to survive in it. How to be more than just the woman you saved. You were never just that." His voice was rough with something that might have been pride, or might have been something more dangerous. "You were always a queen, Lita. You just needed a kingdom worthy of you." She kissed him then, claiming the moment before he could, and tasted smoke and whiskey, and the future she was choosing. When she pulled back, his eyes were dark with want and respect in equal measure. "Then I accept," she said. "Your offer. Your empire. Your throne." Outside the window, the city glittered with possibility and threat. Somewhere in those streets, enemies were plotting, and allies were waiting, and the game of power continued its eternal dance. But up here, in this moment, Lita Martin stood beside Shen Chu and felt the weight of her choice settle over her shoulders like a crown. She'd started as a single mother, hiding a stranger from the police. She'd end as a queen who'd never hide from anything again. Thanks for watching. Please like, comments, and subscribe.